Hello my wonderful, beautiful friends guys, welcome back to r/EntitledPeople, where people truly believe that the world revolves around them and nobody matters. And in this episode guys, Karens are running wild yet again, stealing from people, abandoning their toddlers, running illegal operations, and one paramedic tells his story about the time he encounters an entitled Karen. Guys, I hope you enjoy the stories, don't shake your heads too hard, and as always, you can send or link your stories to this email right here. So I read another story recently that reminded me of this incident, which took place in the early 2000s. I was working at a large church, like 2,000 plus members, and on Sundays I ran the audio and video booth. We had 3 services, a 7 a.m. early service, the main service at 10 a.m., and a late service at 11:30 a.m. Each service ran for about an hour and 15 minutes. On Sunday, during the 10 a.m. service, the pastor's wife went into labor 3 weeks early. The pastor left in the middle of his sermon and the youth pastor took over. The youth pastor did a great job of taking over and wished the mother and baby well and that the service wrapped up early. We then had a quick meeting to decide what to do about the 11:30 service, and the youth pastor volunteered to give a sermon. It was his first time giving a sermon in front of that many people up on the big stage. He was nervous and he rolled through it quickly, forgetting about the closing songs. So church ends at 12:15 instead of the normal 12:45, and this is relevant. Everyone had cleared out of the church by 12:30. I shut down all the equipment and turned out all the lights and then went down the hall to make sure the lights were out in the classrooms, like I normally did. That's when I saw that one light was on and I found a girl named Katie, another church employee who worked in the nursery on Sundays. She was sitting in a rocking chair rocking a toddler and I saw tears rolling down her face. I asked her what was wrong and she could hardly speak, she was so upset. She said the toddler's parents had dropped him off before the early service and they never came back. The poor baby had been there almost 5 hours. The parents had not even given a contact number. All Katie knew was the child's first name. I immediately called the youth pastor, who quickly turned around and came back to the church. The child was very out of it. He was either hungry or tired. We had snacks but no food, and there wasn't really a place to put the kid down for a nap. I ran to get some chicken nuggets while they figured out what to do. When I got back, a couple had pulled in right in front of me. They asked where everyone was, and I said church ended early today. That's when they said, okay, we're just here to pick up our son. Now I wasn't about to get involved with the drama, so I just unlocked the door and let them inside, and the youth pastor was livid and he lit into them. It turns out the parents wanted some alone time and they had been dropping off their kid at church and then leaving to go do stuff. They had been doing this for weeks, dropping him off around 7:45 a.m. and coming to pick him up around 12:45 p.m. And here's the part where the parents are really entitled. They got mad at the youth pastor for ending church early. They yelled at him for endangering their child by ending the service early, and they threatened to sue. The dad was right up in the youth pastor's face, and I thought they might fight. But the youth pastor was a big dude, and I think that kept the dad from doing anything else. I didn't stay in there. I went into the next room with Katie and the child and gave him nuggets, which he gulped down. The parents finally took the kid and left. The youth pastor and his wife took us to lunch because we were still upset by the whole thing. I think about that kid a lot. I hope his parents didn't abandon him. I wish I had a follow-up, but as far as I know, they never came back. Yeah, I would call the police at that point, guys. Like, what the parents were doing was considered child abandonment. And I'm pretty sure they never came back again because they knew they'd be dealing with cops if they tried that again. Hopefully they didn't just switch churches and are still doing the same thing. Some people should not be parents, seriously. So this is a pretty long one, so get ready. I'm a 19-year-old student who's just finished college, and I have a year off to do whatever I want. For me, this is spending time working in my local cafe. So on this day, I'm on my lunch break and I'm relaxing in a corner table with some chocolate cake and tea. I'm on my laptop playing a game when Karen and her son enter the cafe. The mom looks like she's in her mid-40s, while the kid looks about 7. So Karen's ordering at the counter, being served by my friend. I don't take any notice and continue playing my game. When they're done, they come sit at the table next to me. My lunch break's just about to end, so I'm getting ready to go back on shift when the kid notices that I'm playing a video game. The kid then says to his mom, "Mummy, can I play that game?" The woman then tells her kid that yes, he can play the game. She then taps me on the shoulder and says, "Hi, I noticed that you're playing a game on your laptop. It looks interesting." Now me, being the antisocial person I am, just say, "Okay," and more or less ignore her. She then proceeds by saying, "My son would really like to play that game, so maybe you could let my son play on your laptop for a while." At this point, she's got this really friendly but not so friendly look on her face. So I just say, "Ma'am, I'm sorry, I'm about to go back on shift and I need to pack up my things, including my laptop, I'm sorry." The boy then says to his mom, "It's okay, Mummy, it's his laptop." Now, I kind of have a soft spot for kids who are considerate and generally socially aware, so I sort of cave in. I end up setting up my laptop and loading up a game for him to play, and the kid seems happy. I say to the mother that I don't need my computer during shift, and that her kid can play on it, as long as she keeps an eye on it and makes sure it doesn't get damaged. About 20 minutes later, however, I see the woman packing up the laptop. I just assume she's gonna give it back to me and leave, but she packs up the computer, stands up, and walks to the door and attempts to leave with it. I hastily leave my place at the counter, apologizing to the customer that's currently ordering, and race after her. By the time I catch up to her, she's out the door and 10 feet down the pavement, trying to unlock her car. I ask her what the hell she's doing, and she explains that her kid wants to keep playing the game, so she's taking the laptop. Hearing that, I'm rather pissed off at this point, so I say, "Ma'am, I bought that computer with my own money. I don't intend on letting someone just take off with it." The mom then says, "Well, my son needs a laptop. Let me buy it off you." I then try and take back my laptop as she hasn't put it in a bag. She's just clutching it under her arm. I manage to take it back, but then she proceeds to drop her bag and try to snatch the laptop back. She then starts screaming, "Assault! This man assaulted me! Someone call the cops!" This is the point where my friend comes out of the cafe along with the manager. The woman then says that I tried to steal the laptop off her and that I should be fired. Now, my coworker is a dear friend of mine. He then tells the lady that he knows for a fact that it's not her computer and to give it back right away, or else the police would get involved. And then, no joke, the lady just bolts into her car and drives off. Luckily, I managed to take a photo of her plates and give that information to the police. Guys, and that's why you don't let complete strangers use your things, especially not an expensive laptop. Like seriously, OP almost paid the price that day. Like imagine if that woman just booked it out of the store when OP wasn't looking and paying attention and just disappeared forever. He'd be out of a laptop. And the screaming of fake assault and the lying, oh my goodness, ain't that terrifying. Like some people literally want to destroy others when they don't get what they want. And while we're on the topic of computers and entitled people, listen to this, guys. Okay, so I will keep this short. I have a $2,000 computer and a really expensive monitor to go with it. It's got years of old photos and files that are extremely important to me. One day at a party, my mom's friend Karen and her son Damien comes over. She's 42 and he's 12. She tells Damien to play with my group of friends who are between the ages of 15 to 17. We were in my room playing on my PlayStation, which connects to my monitor. It's 1:30 in the morning, and I'm surprised that the kid's still awake. He asked to play, but we're playing Grand Theft Auto, and we plan to watch a few violent shows on Netflix later, so it would be inappropriate for him. We explain this to him, but Damien doesn't listen, and he says he'll tell his mom if we don't let him. That's when my friend John takes him to the living room, where Karen's sipping on a tall glass of wine and laughing with the other moms. You know, mom stuff. All getting drunk. John explains to Karen, and she says she understands, or she acts like it to get out of it, and she just asked us to let Damien watch so she can have some time drinking. I'm in the room, and that's when Damien enters. I didn't know the exchange just happened, so I ask him to leave. The kid then starts shouting, cursing, and trying to attack some of us. He then gets a hold of my box of change and he flings it across the room and it smashes my monitor. Now I'll admit, I did act harshly within the next few minutes, but I believe I was justified. I kicked him out and pulled him out of the room and told my parents and Karen what happened. I can see at this point that Karen's physically drunk. She starts yelling at me saying it's my fault my monitor's broken and that I should have just let her son watch because he's known to throw tantrums. She and Damien leave the party shortly after. The next day is when we contact Karen to repay or replace and talk about the cost of the monitor. She doesn't budge. She says she's not paying for it as it's not her fault. And after a few times of my mom calling her, she decides to block our number. My parents are telling me that they're taking legal action against them, but I really don't know what's happening. I still hate the fact that they could just block us after being friends with my mom for so long. A friend like that wasn't truly a friend at all, right? Like, that sounds terrible. I couldn't imagine breaking something expensive that belongs to someone else and just blocking them from my life because I don't want to pony up and pay to replace it. And also, like, is the cost of a monitor even worth going to small claims court over, or is that something OP should consider a loss? So back in 1993, I was driving down the highway, heading to visit a friend for a barbecue. It was a beautiful day, about 75 degrees, clear skies, and a light breeze. I had my windows down enjoying the weather and the fact that there was nearly no traffic. I'm cruising along at about 65 miles per hour when I spot a car about a quarter mile ahead, opening their passenger door. Now this immediately got my attention, as who opens their car door at freeway speeds? That's when I see something small getting tossed onto the gravel at the side of the road. Now, I'm thinking they tossed some trash out of the door, and I was just starting to get irritated because my community keeps the roads clean and well kept. The door closes and they continue on their way. And that's when I notice that the black thing they tossed is moving. So I slam my brakes, come to a sliding stop on the shoulder, jump out of my truck, and run over to what I find is a puppy. And I'm furious. Like, how can someone throw a puppy out of a moving car doing 65 miles per hour? But my fury has to wait. The puppy is injured but alive. Luckily, I was about 3 miles from the local animal shelter and they have a vet on duty. So I gingerly pick up the puppy, get into my truck, and make record time getting to the vet. When I arrive, I rush the puppy inside, and while the doctor takes the puppy into the back room, I ask the girl at the front desk to call the cops, please. Now comes the relief. Somehow the puppy only had some minor injuries, mostly just scrapes and small cuts. Nothing was broken. The only semi-major injury was the damaged ear that was split and bleeding. After I told the doctor what happened, he was amazed the puppy didn't break any bones. At that point, I was just starting to calm down, and while waiting for the cops, I discussed the puppy with the doctor and discovered that she was likely only 3 to 4 weeks old. I gave all the info I could to the cops, but since I wasn't close enough to get a license plate number, they had little hope of catching these people. Now I should also mention that I come from a family of mechanics, and one of my hobbies is restoring old cars, so I'm very good at recognizing makes and models. Well, it just so happened that I did notice that it was an early 60s Ford Ranchero that had thrown out the puppy. Even in the 90s, that was a fairly uncommon vehicle. It also wasn't enough for the cops to do anything with, but it was memorable to me. Now flash forward about 6 weeks. The puppy had to stay at the shelter to recover and as evidence, until it had been fully weaned, vaccinated, and fixed. After which I was allowed to adopt her, and no one had any doubt I would take her since I spent nearly every day going to visit. Now enters the entitled D-bag. On the day I was allowed to pick up Darla, my new puppy, I was traveling down the same highway when I spot that Ranchero. At this point, it could be someone else, but what's the likelihood of 2 Rancheros the same color being in the same area? So I decide to follow them and get their license plates and see where they lived. It took about 20 minutes and they led me back to a rural area and they pulled into an old, rundown barn. I parked on the road a little ways away and decided to sneak over to the barn. And what I saw made me sick. Now I'm sure you've seen those commercials about people leaving dogs and cats in filth with no food or water on TV. They do no justice to what I was seeing. Now, being that this is before cell phones, let alone camera phones, I went back to my truck, got my Polaroid, took about 5 or 6 photos, and went right back to the animal shelter and spoke to the animal control officers. I showed them the photos and they immediately called the cops, and I followed them back to the barn. When we got there, the entitled idiot and the 2 other pieces of crap were caught. We ended up saving about 30 puppies. The entitled D-bag was screaming at the cops, "What are you doing? We did nothing wrong. You have no right to be here. You're trespassing." The guy went on and on. Luckily, in this area, cops don't need a warrant when any life, animal or human, is in peril. After they were arrested, we got all the other puppies and dogs and rushed them back to the shelter. I couldn't help myself. I was so furious. More so than I've ever been in my entire life. I marched over to the three and asked how they could do this. The two pieces of crap would not answer or even look at me. They never said a word, but they just stood there with their heads hanging. But the entitled D-bag just looks at me as if I've grown a second head or something. And he says, "What are you talking about?" I respond, "How can you treat dogs this way?" The guy then says, "I can do anything I want with them. They belong to me." The guy just kept screaming at me and everyone else there. He says, "They're just animals. Now get these handcuffs off me or I'll sue you all." He started screaming obscenities at everyone, mostly that he could do anything he wanted and that no one could tell him what to do with his dogs. I then got an idea, as several of the puppies rescued looked just like Darla. I knew this a-hole was going to jail, but I wanted to see if I could add to it. So I wave over one of the cops and then ask the entitled D-bag, "Does that include throwing the puppies from your car at 65 miles per hour?" The guy just laughs and says, "Sure, why not? I gotta get rid of the runts somehow. They don't sell well." At that, I looked at the cop and asked if we could add the charge for when they threw out Darla. The cop said I will do everything I can to get that added personally. Hearing that, the entitled D-bag looked shocked and he said, "But you can't prove I did anything like that." That's when I replied, "I was behind you 6 weeks ago and I witnessed you doing just that. And I made my statement to the cops then. I'll make sure I tell them that when I testify against you too." After this, I left. I picked up Darla and went home. It took nearly a year for all the dogs and puppies rescued to recover and find homes, and all were placed with loving homes. Many actually were taken by a service and emotional support organization where both the dogs and new owners could get all the love and attention each needed. For those interested, Darla was a beagle mix. She got to be about 25 to 30 pounds. She was the friendliest dog you've ever seen. She loved to play soccer. She loved nothing better than to run full tilt, pushing the soccer ball with her nose and yelping and baying all over the field. She lived 18 years and she passed peacefully in her sleep in 2011, never having left my side. The entitled D-bag, however, was convicted on more than 140 counts, including at least 58 counts of animal cruelty. The DA pushed for and got consecutive sentences, so the dude has to serve 38 years before he'd be even considered for parole in 2031. I understand he applied for compassion release last year as he's currently dying of cancer and was only given 3 months to live, but that was denied. Guys, and they say not all heroes wear capes. Like, not only did OP save all those puppies, but prevented that man from continuing to do this in the future. And that prison sentence though, wow, holy cow guys, 38 years. I bet he wasn't so smug when he's heard he's gotta serve that much jail time. And the dude got exactly what he deserved. Though I wouldn't be mad if they also added the punishment of throwing him out of a car moving at highway speeds. Alright, so I'm not really sure where this story might belong, but it's definitely not your usual one. Call it under the heading of karma for entitled people. For some background, I've been a paramedic since 1977, and at the time of the story, I was working in East Texas, in the Tyler area. There are several highways running into the city, and one of these comes in from the north, crossing a very large interstate. Where these two roads cross, the city of Tyler, the rose capital of the world, has embossed very large and artistic rose symbols on the overpasses, very striking. As an ambulance agency that predominantly runs 911 calls, we covered most of the surrounding counties outside the city. The area was very rural, and this particular area at the intersection of those interstate highways was known for its high accident rate. Now, also relevant is the prevalence of rich daddies buying their daughters one model of car for their first ride, a Mustang with the largest engine you could get. Now, I'm sure where you could see where this leads. After all, what could go wrong with giving an airhead teenager a high horsepower machine and the wide open road to test it on? Now, due to its rural nature, we tended to see the same people on calls time after time in our coverage area. One particular pain was an entitled girl who was caught by the local cops or the Texas Highway Patrol and always maintained that she has a medical condition, such as diabetes. Despite the cops knowing her and knowing damn well that she was lying, liability compelled them to call an ambulance to check her out before proceeding. So we would pull up, do an examination, determine that she was not in fact in need of medical attention, and release her to the officers, who would then ticket her, or if the offense warranted, take her in. None of which ever resulted in any punishment because her father was a local judge who would squash any charges levied against her. Now this infuriated all, but there was nothing we could do about it. Now I can't universally condemn her father, who was a little older than typical for having a 16-year-old child, and his wife had passed away years earlier, so he was raising her all on his own. And he was, as a lot of single dads are, clueless. Those of us in the first responder community knew of the situation, and we were keeping count. And when the number of times she had been set free with no consequences finally matched her age, which was 16, we took note. At about 0200 on a cold Saturday morning, my partner and I were roused out of our warm beds by the speaker telling us to respond to Code 3 to a motor vehicle accident. This took place at the intersection of the interstate highways I mentioned earlier. It was about a 4-minute response, and as usual, en route, we got details from dispatch. We were informed that it was a single vehicle accident, that the police and the local fire department were on scene. It turns out that didn't matter. We exited the highway and turned under the underpass, only to have to swerve to miss debris on the roadway. We made our way to the flashing lights, and one of the firemen simply pointed at the overpass abutment exactly centered in the middle of the inlaid rose symbol was what used to be a cherry red Mustang, about 6 feet long from engine to trunk. The fire department was trying, mostly in vain, to separate this metal to get inside. A highway patrol sergeant, let's call him Bob, that I knew well, was watching. He shook his head as I walked up, and he told me there was no need to hurry. One of the fire department paramedics had already gotten a good look inside, as good as a look inside as the twisted metal would allow, and seen what was left. He said his accident reconstruction, from the car's condition, lack of skid marks, etc., that the car was going about 120 miles per hour on impact. I asked him if he could ID the driver, and he pointed several yards away to a twisted license plate. He said, since to my knowledge, she never let anyone else drive her car. Yep, you've no doubt guessed it by now, it was the entitled girl. It took the fire department almost an hour to get the car cut and pried apart, enough to get her out. And I'll spare you the details of her condition, but we got her onto a backboard and into the ambulance and transported her to the local level 1 trauma center. Despite all the history, none of us could find it in ourselves to blame her father, the judge. Now, I'm not gonna lie, that was an unfortunate end, guys, but I had to share this post with you because, unfortunately, that's the reality of not obeying the law and thinking you're above it, and having daddy bail you out all the time. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of our /entitled people. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up and subscribe if you're not subscribed so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, it's an r/I don't work here lady episode, where a Karen pretends she knows the owner to get what she wants, and it backfires so hard on her, guys. It's such a funny story. So go check it out if you haven't, and myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.